when you get to the point where you are starting to live a life which is moral, and you've abandoned immorality, and you're starting to nurture and preserve that which we call the sacred secretion, or that I call the sacred secretion, the chrism. We can refer to it as chrism if we will for the rest of the video. When you begin to get to that point of living a life which is righteous, and God will gift you by anointing you with the oil of gladness, your body becomes so well aligned and you have such a peaceful feeling within yourself and much more sharpness and focus that you begin to realize that if you are turning away from that and you become sexually immoral, or you decide to go and get drunk and you sever it, that these things are not worthwhile anymore. And thus it brings you back to the righteous path, because you want to feel good and be back close to God and feel whole and complete again. And look at the TV adverts, look at the fast food chains, and look at the types of food that they're promoting to people. This holds your consciousness down. This destroys your sacred secretion. Now then you've got the other substances. Like I say, alcohol is advertised and societally ingrained almost. Back in the West, from what I'm seeing, it's still the case. And for I growing up, that everyone just drinks alcohol on a weekend. This is promoted and advertised in a massive way. And it's even every movie, every TV show, people are taking on board alcohol. This severs your sacred secretion, completely destroys the chrism. But at the same time, it destroys any form of altered state of consciousness that might be beneficial to you.
Weapons always close to end, for he has seen too much hatred. Only weapon that he chooses is love, universal call, now for justice.
Hey guys, so after my recent video where I spoke about Jim Carrey and him speaking publicly, who's a very large name in the world, about the sacred secretion or the transformation of the Kundalini energy, as some people would refer to it, that I wanted to speak or elaborate a little more on what I see with the sacred secretion, and more importantly what I see as a war, a societal or an establishment war against that sacred secretion, which could equate to a war on consciousness. Now, first of all, let me try and align something important about what I've spoke about with the Christ within us, the chrism. Now, if you haven't seen the other videos to revisit it, I spoke of and I've practiced in my own life the teachings of esoteric Christianity, whereby there is a secretion which comes from within our brain, inside the unit of our brain between the cerebrum. Now the cerebrum sit on either side of your hemispheres, and this is where the Ark of the Covenant comes from. The Ark of the Covenant have the cherubim angels sitting either side guarding it. The cerebrum are the cherubim. It's a map of your spiritual anatomy, among other things. On a deeper layer, it's a map of your anatomy. And this is why the story of Jericho, where within the Bible, if you don't know, he goes around the city walls 7 times. And once he goes around there 7 times, the walls come down and the city is raised to fire. The 7 represent finding union over your 7 energy centers inside of meditation. The Ark of the Covenant precedes there, because once you have found that union, then you start with your secretion inside the encased in the ark between your 2 hemispheres. The cherubim angels are the cerebrum of your brain. Now the city is raised to fire because you have the levels of consciousness, which I've spoken on many times before in other videos: earth, water, air, fire, new mind. These are the levels of consciousness in Greek mythology and Greek mysticism, which are encoded also in the Bible and have older roots than the Greeks as well. So it's raised to fire because you raise to that higher level of consciousness, which is fire. In modern science, that equates to beta, alpha, theta, delta. So you get into the delta state, where you are completely thoughtless, your brain is operating slowly, and you can find a union with God. Now, this is why, to add to that, you can be baptized with fire by the Christ, Obviously, you don't want fire on your head in the literal sense of the baptism of water. You don't want that happening with fire. It's because it's an internal baptism when you raise your energies through those levels of consciousness, an altered state of consciousness. And of course, we know that from archaeological findings that there were no walls at Jericho. We know this. There were no walls of Jericho. This is a historical fact. So you have to look deeper and find out what is going on. So that slowly explains to you what goes on. You find the union of 7 energy centers, you activate within there the sacred secretion, which making its return journey helps you to fully activate your mind using your pituitary and pineal gland. Once they are active, they secrete serotonin and DMT, which can happen predominantly during long water fasts, and that is when you reach the promised land flowing with milk and honey, the milk being the serotonin because it's a milky substance, the honey being the DMT because it is an amber substance. This translates in esoterics again when Samson beats the lion. Lion over my shoulder. The lion represents the lower nature of the human vehicle, the lower desires, the lower self, which is based upon impulses and desires. Now, you don't have to beat it 24/7, but when you do beat it, you can raise your energies up, and that's why they find honey inside the carcass of the lion, because once you've overcome the lower nature of yourself, then you can activate your pineal and have the secretion and the altered state of consciousness. And inside the altered state of consciousness, from the standard state of consciousness that we see humanity within on the planet at present, you begin to have your union and your intuitive abilities to hear and speak with God. Now, in my life, God uses synchronicities to guide me, and he has done with, I say as humbly as I can, some success. I followed synchronicities that God showed me, 11:11, and that led me to Tanzania. And when I got to Tanzania, again, God showed me the way, what needed to be done. And through prayer and the love and care of other persons that he brought to us via their altered states of consciousness as well, we managed to build all that we have at Share Tanzania. And we are now the guardian of more than 70 children. We have over 600 children out of child labour, and we've got over 60 rescue dogs as well, just to name a few aspects of what's gone on since I started altering my state of consciousness and having an open heart and an open moral way of living, and what I would deem as humbly as I can, to try and live as virtuously and righteously as possible, to live in line with what great teachers asked us to live with, such as Jesus Christ, such as the Buddha, such as the avatars and the teachings of Krishna and the Upanishads, and so on and so forth. Now, the altered state of consciousness from the sacred secretion, let me just get into this slightly. I've said before that the sacred secretion is very much based upon the current state of affairs with your body, but also at the same time, as it says in the Bible, you have loved that which is moral and turned your back on that which is immoral. And so I have anointed you with the oil of gladness above your kin. This is something that we have to understand. You can't live a riotous lifestyle. You can't live the life of a sinner. And then at this certain time of the month when the moon is in your moon sign or in your star sign, then all of a sudden you clean up your act and hope that God's going to bless you with this anointing. Doesn't work that way. You have to be a good person. To put it very simple terms, you have to live righteously. You have to abandon sexual immorality. You have to abandon deceit and lies, and you have to abandon dark thoughts, negative thoughts. You have to abandon the lack of faith that many of us face when we have too much money, etc. You have to abandon the love of the material. You have to turn your back on all those things that are not of the path of that which we would call virtuous. And when you abandon and turn your back on those things, you start on the journey of accessing that which is the oil of gladness, or the anointing of the oil of gladness, or the sacred secretion, or the science of the Christ within you. Now, along with that, in my experience, you have to eat a clean diet. The reason you have to eat a clean diet, first and foremost for young men across the world, if you're drinking alcohol and eating lots of meat, it's nearly impossible to find discipline over your sexual immorality. Absolutely impossible, especially in the modern day society. It is close to impossible, But if you eat a whole foods, plant-based diet, and if you have temperance in that which you eat, and you don't bother with stimulants or downers such as alcohol, you will find it much easier to have dominion over your lower nature and over those things that are deemed as immoral, which cut off and sever that thing that we call the Christ within, the chrism, the etymology of the word Christ being the anointed one, which comes from chrism. And chrism is this internal substance that we can all activate through a secretion and to commune with God, using that by setting up a new electrical circuitry within our brains. But if you are embarking upon immoral behavior in action, deed, thought, feeling, it's not going to happen for you. But at the same time, your temple must be clean. Your temple, the cleanest diet for your temple is indeed a whole food, plant-based diet. But that doesn't have to be the case. Temperance is also going to clean your body. If you are a person, for example, eating lots of acidic foods, such as meat, if you're overeating, it's strictly commanded not to spend time with you if you're pursuing Christ. Keep not company with gluttonous eaters of meat and drunkards, because they are so acidic, and also, of course, they can make very heinous choices when you're in that state of affairs. You can't necessarily make the correct choices because you're based upon more heavily influenced by your sexual impulses, because you're pulled into your body by such a lifestyle and diet. When we eat a more clean, full plant-based diet, you automatically start to clean up your temple. But if you're going to eat the other way, temperance is a necessity. And thus, fasting and water fasting is a necessity. Now, according to many Christians, I live on a constant fast because I live on a plant-based diet. But I do water fast in amongst there as well, whereby I only take on board water and 0 calories. I don't do it as often as I would like to anymore, but I've done a lot of it in the past. And the reason I don't is because I'm on the front line in Tanzania doing what I do with and for God and for these children that we care for. When you get to the point where you are starting to live a life which is moral, and you've abandoned immorality, and you're starting to nurture and preserve that which we call the sacred secretion, or that I call the sacred secretion, the chrism. We can refer to it as chrism if we will for the rest of the video. When you begin to get to that point of living a life which is righteous, and God will gift you by anointing you with the oil of gladness, your body becomes so well aligned and you have such a peaceful feeling within yourself and much more sharpness and focus that you begin to realize that if you are turning away from that and you become sexually immoral, or you decide to go and get drunk and you sever it, that these things are not worthwhile anymore. And thus it brings you back to the righteous path, because you want to feel good and be back close to God and feel whole and complete again. Now, all of this is not just a physiological happening, it's a metaphysical, spiritual happening as well. And people will call that wishy-washy, but if I go and operate on a person, on their physical brain, I don't find their memories in there, but we know they're there. And I don't find their emotions, but we know that they are encased within our being. And the same goes with this. If you think you can somehow trick this, and you can not do the discipline, not do the hard work, not remove those negative behaviours which come from the heart, as the Bible says, that which goes in the mouth bears little significance, that which comes out of the mouth bears much more significance. This is absolutely the foundation of it. If you are not living from a space of purity in your actions, deeds and words, and your inner feelings and thoughts, then you're not going to start this journey. And then on top of that, in my experience, the temple also must be clean. So it's a many-layered thing. It's not just about that which you're thinking, it's also about, in my experience, how well you look after your body, because that then comes into the play of temperance, which is going against things like gluttony, which are very negative for us. So, all of that said, this is the sacred secretion. Now, there is seemingly a war on that, but it's a war on consciousness. Because at the end of all of this process, if you are just a good person, you don't even need to know about the sacred secretion, which is spoken of inside of all of the esoteric texts, because you can just do that which is right. You can live righteously, you can live for others, you can have temperance, you can have discipline. That process inside you will still go on. You will still reach the promised land flowing with milk and honey, DMT and serotonin. You will still have your dreams and images and so on and so forth to allow you to have that union with God to the point where every morning when you step out of bed, you know that God is going to be there if you need him to guide you. With absolute certainty, no need for faith whatsoever. You know I'm talking to you right now through a camera, through your YouTube account. You don't need to have faith in that, and that's the same position I'm at with God now. I need no faith in God, for I know God directly and I've seen his power and what he can build. And Share Tanzania is my evidence of that, because I was a hopeless, useless sinner of a man before then who could not have built this. And it is God and the presence of God alone in my life that allowed it to happen. Now, the war on the sacred secretion and the war on consciousness is a very fine line, because ultimately, with regards to the sacred secretion, if you have temperance and you manage to retain your sexual energy, for example, which is wonderful. There's lots of young men at the moment who are trying to embrace nofap on the internet, which is ultimately how it should be. Then that energy can transmute into an altered state of consciousness. And in those higher levels of consciousness, the higher level of consciousness you get to is where you can commune with God and those beings which are not as dense as our physical body, such as the angels, which are messengers of light, which travel on photons are particles that carry information that travel on angles of light. An angel is a photon traveling on an angle of light. Angel, messenger of light, photon, message, information traveling on an angle of light. When you get lighter, you can hear them much more easily. And this is my experience as well. The lighter I am, the more easily I hear God. If God has a definitive message for me, I'll lose my appetite and I'll just end up fasting, and all of a sudden, eventually after a day or 2 days, I'll get that message very clear. Even if it's a voice, a synchronicity, something will go on and I'll know, okay, this was it. This is what God needed me light for. He needed me higher and not bogged down, because he had something to tell me. And I use this persistently and constantly, and the sacred secretion is part of that in my life. Every month I aim to preserve it and prolong the preservation of it for as long as I can, because it makes me more efficient as a man to do that which God needs me to do. Now, if you can hold on to living correctly and having a lot of love for other persons and the warm feelings that brings into your life, and also at the same time have temperance in your food, which does alter your state of consciousness. You can use endurance exercise, which equates to a style of temperance anyway, because it's as if you've ate less. And you can not be sexually immoral and waste your energy every day with sex and masturbation, or even just looking at things, which brings you down into lower energies anyway. Then you will alter your state of consciousness, and that secretion will allow you to do it. And your pineal, which is not to be feared, because the third eye is simply a gland in the core of your brain, which is part of the anatomy and antenna of prayer. And those who fear it, the simple fact is they have no faith. If you give focus to evil, you give evil strength. Don't give any focus to evil, it's not going to cause you any problems. Electricity can be used to record as I'm speaking now on this camera. It can also be used to harm people. It can also have fire to cook dinner for the children. It can also be used to harm people. It doesn't make the electricity or the fire evil. It means the user is the problem. So your pineal can alter your state of consciousness in conjunction with the sacred secretion. And once this secretion travels up through your vertebrae, you're 33, Jesus dies at the age of 33, it's crucified, a word which has its origins in amplified in power. And when it's crucified between your pituitary pineal gland and amplified in power, as I say, you reach the promised land flowing with milk, serotonin, honey, DMT. You have an altered state of consciousness. And that altered state of consciousness is absolute 100% proof and evidence that God is there and wanting to work with you and through you and around you. But if you can't reach that altered state of consciousness, you get stuck in limbo because you're stuck needing faith without actually experiencing God or his angels or his messengers in a direct form. Once you hear a voice and then something occurs in your life not long later, proving that that voice was correct, you have to have absolute 100% a knowing that God is there. But without that experience, how do you have that knowing? And many people are lost still seeking, etc., because they don't have that knowing. Now, I said at the beginning, it's a war on consciousness, a war on the secretion. Look around inside our society, and if everybody altered their state of consciousness, if everyone preserved the sacred secretion and had a direct experience with God and that which we call the Christ, what would happen to the planet? At present, we live on an Antichrist consciousness planet. This is what it is. Antichrist consciousness equates simply as the following. The establishment can tell you there is no money to feed the hungry and to house the homeless, but there is always infinite money to fire missiles and drop bombs on innocent men, women and children. They'll tell you that they absolutely have to keep felling the rainforest. But the truth is that the money used for certain wars and campaigns in the Middle East and all over the world can put a stop to that. And what does the war do? Nothing. What would the other thing do? Something very beneficial for the loving mother that we call our planet. Or you can label Gaia, the spirit of the planet, that which is an extension of the core creation of all things which we call God. Now, that is evidence enough that we live within an antichrist establishment system, a society based upon antichrist consciousness. If we could all touch an altered state of consciousness and reach the Christ within us, things would change overnight, but the antichrist consciousness would lose its grip, and those who are hungry and walking the Luciferian path inside that antichrist consciousness would lose their grip. So the central banks, the massive corporations, the dark hand behind the Fabian socialist movement, which, started at the UN, for example, they would lose their grip on what they want, this need for world power, this need for a world government. And thus, there needs to be some sort of battle against the sacred secretion or against the altered state of consciousness. Now, the altered state of consciousness is very obvious if you look to psychedelics. And psychedelics is another topic altogether, but it can be used, as we know, DMT and ayahuasca, etc., to have direct experiences. But it's made illegal in most parts of the world. And other psychedelics, such as mushrooms, which were clearly used in shamanic practices, were made illegal. Now, I believe in the power of shamanic practice because I, as a person who can speak on spiritual topics and has gone through my long fasts, my 40 days and 40 nights, I wandered alone in the wilderness, just as a shaman would, for many, many, many months, and bordering on years. And I did, via that, learn direct experience from spirit and from God. I learned direct discipline in myself, because when you've only got yourself for company, you soon want yourself to go away so you can just be a receptor of the present moment. So I have a lot of respect and love for the shamanic practices, but the fact that all things psychedelic are illegal tells us something straight away. However, it's not that our society doesn't like to alter its state of consciousness, because other drugs are promoted. Alcohol, the most terrible and wasteful substance to consume for a human being, is touted and promoted. And countless millions of people every night, billions, are drinking it because they are told it's the one that they can have. So we are not opposed to altered states of consciousness as a society, but it would seem that our core governing system that makes the laws are opposed to the altered states of consciousness that can allow us to reconnect with spirit and with the healing energy of Gaia or Mother Earth, and with the Creator and with God. So that very physical and practical aspect, that those laws are in place to make it illegal to take psychedelics tells us something, first of all, on the war of altered states of consciousness. Why would that be? But we allow people to take other things which are far more damaging to their health and often to the society that we live in, such as alcohol. Now, if you look at that in another sense, away from psychedelics, and as I said, you have to live a life which is in line with that which is virtuous. You have to have sexual discipline, you have to not overeat, and you have to have respect for your temple, you have to be moral, you can't be involved in all aspects that we deem to be immoral and adulterous and lies and murder and so on and so forth. All of the things we know are wrong. Society is almost built in a way where it advertises those things. Now, first of all, let's start with something simple which exists in everybody's life at some point: gluttony. You know, without television, without distractions, movies, etc., gluttony would be diminished massively. You would drop that by 80-90%. Because when you've got nothing but yourself for company, you soon realise it's important that you keep your body aligned. But when you can externalise everything into a TV, it's easier just to keep overeating and just rely on the TV to look after your well-being for a little while. But look at the adverts, the food that is promoted to us, the junk foods that are promoted to us, the highly acidic foods that are promoted to us. They really hold a person's consciousness right down. And the question is it truly by design? Because what are they selling? They're selling a temporal pleasure in the mouth to get people to consume them. Because people, if they were truly connected and alert people, they would know that these things, for all temporarily pleasurable on the tongue, lead you to feel terrible afterwards. But the terrible feeling, people don't feel it anymore. They see it as a normal state of being. So that temporary pleasure almost seems worth it. And look at the TV adverts, look at the fast food chains, and look at the types of food that they're promoting to people. This holds your consciousness down. This destroys your sacred secretion. Now then you've got the other substances. Like I say, alcohol is advertised and societally ingrained almost. Back in the West, from what I'm seeing, it's still the case. And for I growing up, that everyone just drinks alcohol on a weekend. This is promoted and advertised in a massive way. And it's even every movie, every TV show, people are taking on board alcohol. This severs your sacred secretion. Completely destroys the chrism, but at the same time it destroys any form of altered state of consciousness that might be beneficial to you. Then you move on to the needing to be sexually moral. Look at again at all of this part of Western reality: the TV, the media, the adverts, the fashion lines, the idea that having your own independence means that you can dress more skimpily than what you used to. This is a very strange way to feel that you are not oppressed, that you are allowed to be a sexual object for men. It's almost oppressing yourself more, and vice versa, men with women. You see, the whole collective system has to have a point of origin. And do we really think it's been a natural progression that human beings have started wanting to be hypersexualized in the West? Or has there been a massive role came into this via the media, via the movies, via the advertising, via the TV shows, and via the fashion lines, and so on and so forth, and those things that get attention from the media, such as certain celebrities, etc., who arguably, with inside that realm where people look to role models and sadly idol worship, those that are in the public eye are getting the focus from the media, which is controlled by the same antichrist energy that doesn't want the Christ to take hold. Now, actually promoting people that they know will go to war with the Christ within us, the sacred secretion, or that positive altered state of consciousness, by giving you the scantily clad women on the TV, or the men who have been buffing themselves up at the gym, as if this is the only thing that a man or a woman needs to do, is to look pretty and to look good to get what they need out of life. Being healthy, very important. Being beautiful, not so important. Beauty, matters not once you find the love of your life. Who cares what people think you look like? If you find the person you love, which you can, if you find a person that loves you for you, then you're fine. It doesn't matter what people think of you. And everywhere I turn in England, people are wearing makeup and unusual outfits sometimes, and it's very difficult to see compared to where I'm from in Tanzania, where no one has the money to do that, so everyone just kind of gets on and, you know, they meet people, they fall in love still without worrying, how do I look for this crowd? This all stems from that same problem of the sexual push against society, which is a war against that secretion again, because it forces, speaking from the perspective of a male, it forces young men and women, I've heard and read, into such unbelievable sexual immorality, be it masturbation, pornography use, or just viewing the other sex in a bad way. And then on top of all of that, you couple that with the alcohol, you couple that with the acidic foods, and they don't stand a chance. People don't stand a chance of having any discipline, any whatsoever. And once you take away that core foundation and you push people into that state of the impulse of the five senses, then how are they ever going to exercise a true free will that we can label as divine? Because their free will is so suppressed, because they're so caught inside their reptilian cortex, their five senses, they can't raise up out of it, alter their state of consciousness, because they're acting upon impulse like other animals. You see, humans must be controlled by the Antichrist establishment, and the only way to hunt an animal is to make it predictable. You need it in its five senses. And if you want to ascend to God, you've got to have your five senses die, just as Jesus Christ had to be wounded 5 times on the cross so as he could ascend to the Lord. The 5 wounds represent the death of the 5 senses. Just as David had to take 5 stones and strike the Goliath, which was his ego, his animal nature, straight here with one of those 5 stones. The 5 senses die, the energy rises through the 7 energy centers and activates the pineal, where you have that union with God. All of this is absolute necessity. But the whole of society, seemingly, is almost designed to be at war with that necessity taking place. And this is then a spiritual physical battle, because it's the Antichrist and his physical weapons versus the Christ and his physical spokespersons. And the spokespersons of the Christ are those who live by Christ, those who do things in the name of God, in the name of love, in the name of that which is just. The Antichrist are those corporations who force people to be eating the wrong foods and to be taking on board the alcohol with their advertising and to go to war. And this is the battle that we see playing out right now. And the war on the altered states of consciousness is a direct link to the war on the sacred secretion. Because yes, you can take psychedelics, but if you live righteously, virtuously, with temperance, and you withhold your energy, for example, if you choose not to expel your sexual energy, which is a very precious and sacred energy, you will alter your state of consciousness without psychedelics. You will have that direct experience with God. You will. It's just part of the human anatomy of prayer. But our society today is clearly based upon a war against that positive altered state of consciousness, and thus a war against the Christ within each and every one of us, or the sacred secretion within each and every one of us. And it works like a big circle. If you make people eat the wrong food, if you make people consume the wrong substances, such as too much alcohol, they don't stand a chance of being moral and astute people. It's very difficult, very, very much more difficult to do. But on another level, if people are consuming alcohol and overeating, but they are still loving and positive and morally upright and righteous persons, then it's way easier inside a society that can push those buttons to get those people to overeat or to overindulge in alcohol to make them fall. And that's why it's a big circle. And the best way to fix it is to jump out of that societal circle where there's any chance of weakness and jump into a new one. And the new circle you should jump into is living with all of your heart and being in a means, by the means of wanting to be someone who lives in line, for example, with the teachings of Jesus Christ, a virtuous life, a one which is in service of God and service to others, and that which we hold dear and know to be the moral love of humanity and the hope and the light of humanity. And when you do that, and you also find discipline over your five senses whilst doing that, so your actions, your deeds, your thoughts, your words, your feelings are all heading towards the path of virtuousness, and also including that the nurturing of your temple is heading or complementing that to allow you to do that, then we start to become very powerful human beings indeed. And that is exactly what the Antichrist establishment does not want. Powerful human beings who have raised their sacred secretion, have gained full control of the oil of gladness, as God called it in the Bible, and they have more brain power than they had before. They have more focus, more sharpness, more intuitive abilities, new aspects of their senses they didn't even know existed, such as the ability to live in line with synchronicities and live in line with intuitive knowings from that which we call the heavens, and become fully empowered human beings. Because the more people who do that, the more Christs are born within each and every one of us, the less chance the Antichrist establishment, which clearly has control of the planet, has of carrying on with its existence. And I hope and pray for the day that the knowledge of the secretion is public, and that people understand that it's not just about being a good person, but when you are a good person, God will reward you with higher functionality. He'll reward you with new gifts you didn't know existed. And all you have to do that is to just do the right thing. And once you do the right thing long enough, your moral compass will come back into order. And when your moral compass comes back into order, you just do that which feels right. And when you do that which is morally correct, then you begin to understand. If your moral compass is intact, you begin to understand how it is that you're supposed to walk. And if your moral compass is not intact, read what people like Jesus and Buddha asked you to do, and follow that moral compass of compassion. And stamp out that energy which is at war with you, your family, your children, and that internal secretion within you. Because the more immoral it gets you to behave, the more abusive towards your temple and others it gets you to behave, the more ignorant and loveless it gets you to behave, the less chance you have of that secretion returning, the less chance you have of being a fully realized human being. Because it constantly forces you into the lower levels of consciousness. If you can just be a good person, look after your body and look after others, and put love at the beginning of every action that you have, then we win the war. I think it's as simple as that. Put love first, look after your temple. We win the war. Love and light, guys.